Hey, this is Pat Ricard, aka Project Pat, and you're listening to the Baltimore Beatdown Podcast, the best Ravens podcast on the planet.
It's pretty incredible. In fact, it's la-marvelous.
Thank you, guys.
All right, we're back. It is the Baltimore Beatdown Podcast. Had a little bit of a false start there for anyone watching on Twitter, YouTube, but it is Jake and Spencer here. We're all in for week one, bud. Despite our technical difficulties, we're just going to keep this thing rolling.
We are back. We're good to go. And yeah, we'll keep it going.
Yes, we sure will. So what were we talking about there? We were talking about the week one game coming up tonight for Thursday Night Football. It is Texans. It is Chiefs. It's going to be a fun one, like we touched on, very high scoring, two young quarterbacks who just got absolutely paid. And, we don't have to rehash it too much, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the Chiefs are stacked. They're ready, good to go. And that the Texans are probably a little bit lacking. They had a lot of turnover, feels like they are in a weird position with Bill O'Brien, who feels like he is on a very strange hot seat potentially with too much power and not delegating enough of his responsibilities, making some weird decisions, acquiring, the oft-injured Brandon Cooks, the oft-injured and probably almost guaranteed to be overpaid David Johnson unless he goes for 2,000 yards and 15 touchdowns this year, total scrimmage yards. So feels like the Chiefs are probably going to get off to a hot start. I feel like the Texans figure things out and keep pace a little bit just because Deshaun Watson is such a high-level player and have a plethora of receiving options still with Fuller as well as Stills, and I can't even recall the rest of the receivers off the top of my head right now, but they've got some options there still, and I think Watson will be able to keep pace a little bit. The Chiefs probably will have a 2-score lead at some point in the fourth quarter, and I see the Texans kind of scoring towards the end of the game to make it a 1-score game. Kind of similar to what the Ravens did in Kansas City last year, but in the end, the Chiefs are in control most of the time and comfortably win.
Yeah, like I was saying, I think a little bit of sloppy defense, high-powered offense, not going to be as affected by that kind of stuff.
Good to go.
You have this Periscope or something on?
Oh, yeah, I somehow jumped on. Sorry, I don't know what's going on.
This is Podception right there.
Yep, there we go, Podception, but we're back.
Yeah, we never went anywhere. But yeah, like I was saying, I think more high-powered offense. I think the defenses are going to suffer a little bit. But I think we've been saying for a while now, I think Bill O'Brien is a much better head coach than he is, general manager. And I think he gets crapped on a little bit in both capacities, where I think he would probably be fine if he would just step away from that general management capacity. But regardless, I think it's going to be a fun game. Little David Johnson hot tip. I think he should probably hammer him in fantasy. I think old Billy O.B. is going to want to look good for this trade, so he's going to be feeding the ball to David Johnson.
Yeah, it feels like they might use him in the slot out wide, and that's how he had that mega successful season a few years ago where he did he might have hit 2,000 scrimmage yards, somewhere around there, and did have like 18 touchdowns and won me a fantasy league. So if they use him the right way, they split him out wide, they put him in the slot, they motion him, get him the ball and manufacture touches in space, that could be a very good thing. The Texans do run a lot of jet sweep concepts and a lot of those play action jet sweeps, then throwing the ball off to the flats on the jet sweep motion, things like that. Deshaun Watson's pretty good with those, and his athletic ability allows him to buy some time and make the right decision there. So I think he would be really good in that kind of role. Duke Johnson as well, another guy that can play in the slot or be in the backfield and do some various things there. So I'm interested to see how they deploy those guys, plus Will Fuller. Feels like, I don't know what their tight end situation is like. I haven't checked on the Texans roster a ton. I know that is it still Fells or whoever the hell they had? I can't remember, but feels like they could really use like a big, tall, reliable target for Deshaun Watson. I feel like that's kind of a missing link in this offense. Their offensive line was a little bit better last year. Their cornerbacks, I feel like, are not in the best spot right now as well. I feel like I'm kind of wary of their defensive depth. I'm not super high on them this season, but we'll see what the Texans can do.
Yeah, we certainly will. It's going to be a fun one tonight, like we mentioned. So not to belabor that, moving on into the first piece of news that we were just touching on before we crashed out there. Jadeveon Clowney signing with the Tennessee Titans on a 1-year deal, had interest in coming to the Ravens, but they were reportedly lukewarm.
Yeah, it feels like they've sniffed around all those situations, and it feels inevitable that they're going to make some sort of move, but it has to be the right player at the right price. And it feels like it'll probably be someone on a rookie contract that's a rental. If the Ravens are sitting, 6-1, 5-2, 4-0, something like that, and there's a team that just flat out is not getting it done. Maybe it's a player like a Miles Jack or something, but a player that's just not getting it done by any means. Miles Jack does have a really expensive contract, so they can't afford that. But something like that, on the Jags or maybe the DC football team or something like that. So I feel like they sniffed around Ngakoue. Our boy Barstool Banks said that they were, pretty involved in that, and feels like, now it's kind of come out that Earl Thomas was being shopped around, and there was that report that, the Ravens were potentially offering a Pro Bowl player, a team was offering a Pro Bowl player, and feels like the moves were just a little bit too expensive, a little bit too risky in terms of jeopardizing things in the future. But again, I think DaCosta will keep reaching around. He poked around DeAndre Hopkins, and eventually he's going to, strike while the iron's hot and find a team that is tanking, doing very poorly, that just wants a pick, doesn't care, doesn't plan on retaining a player, not terribly interested in them during a rebuild, maybe a sub-premier position. So not like, outside of like cornerback, left tackle, quarterback. Obviously, they don't need one, receiver, those kinds of positions. So maybe a safety, linebacker, guard, something like that. And maybe we see it down the road. But yeah, Clowney, they tried to make it work at the right price by kind of getting the Jags to foot the bill on about $5 million of a signing bonus so that they could swing over a second-round pick. And the NFL doesn't allow that in certain circumstances. The Texans shipped Brock Osweiler off to Cleveland on that huge contract where the Browns just offloaded it and cut his ass. And so it feels like if the NFL will let you do a sign and trade based on the precedent, I guess, if you're dumping a salary so that a player can kind of be cut that is just in a horrible situation. But if it's going to be a good quality player that is going to give the team a competitive advantage by doing so, then they don't allow it, which is kind of weird. But I guess they just don't feel like opening the can of worms to that, because then teams will just start going bonkers doing that and saving money. And it might, end up swaying competitive balances and making things really weird. But if any team can do it at any time, I don't see how that really, sways a competitive balance. But it could definitely just open up a can of worms and teams trying to find more loopholes in that same region. So interesting stuff. Weird that they didn't allow it, but I kind of see why. And yeah, I think the Ravens will make a move eventually before this trade deadline.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a don't hate the player, hate the game type thing, because I absolutely loved that Osweiler move when the Browns made it. It was like an NBA sort of salary dump type deal. I think we should see more of that, depending on how many of these quarterback contracts that are just getting handed out like candy at this point wind up not working out in the vein that it did not with Osweiler for the Texans. But yeah, as far as Clowney goes, man, I wasn't surprised to see him want to come to Baltimore. Super Bowl contender, stable organization. Very weird start to his career on his side of things, where he probably just wants to settle down at this point and start getting consistent big paychecks coming in year over year. But I mean, the Ravens really can't afford that right now. And if he wants something other than a 1-year deal where he's just jumping place to place, I mean, obviously he didn't get that with the Titans, but the Ravens weren't going to be able to give it to him either. So sort of my short analysis on it was right place, wrong time. Shout out to Dr. John.
Exactly. So at this point, yeah, Clowney's on the Titans. The Ravens will probably keep their ear to the ground, and Eric DaCosta will Sacagawea his way into a trade of some. Huh?
Sacagawea? Oh, you're Sacagawea. Night at the museum.
Yeah, that one. That one took me by surprise the first time I heard it.
Listen, all things Night at the Museum, I'm certainly here for. So be prepared. If you tee me up like that again, I'm just going to be mashing it out of the park.
Exactly. And I love kids movies like that have the adult humor in them that kind of is like subliminal or goes over the kids' heads a bit. And that's why Night at the Museum is such a great movie. Yeah, it's a very maybe the most Stiller movie possible. Exactly. Him just running around with his eyes all wide.
Yeah, just the ears
frazzled,
absolutely popping. Yeah, love Ben Stiller.
exactly. But yeah, let's keep this train rolling.
Yeah, let's do it. I completely just laid some dynamite down and just blew it off the rails and started pilfering all the money that was in the train cabins there. But yeah, getting it back onto the rails. Ravens had their final cutdowns over the weekend, and maybe the most sad thing that we saw from that is the end of the 16-year streak of rostering an undrafted rookie. That finally ends with them making some interesting moves this year. Some of the notable ones included the same 3 QBs again this year. So that means Tyler Huntley gets cut. He is going to the practice squad. They opted to go with 2 tight ends, which is probably the first time they've done that for a while, though they did work out Crockett Gilmore, a familiar face the other day. Waived third-year receiver Jaleel Scott, RIP in peace, him signing with the Jets practice squad today, I think. And they opted to go with as many inside linebackers as cornerbacks. So you got Patrick Queen starting, Malik Harrison, LJ Fort, Chris Board, and Otaro Alaka, friend of the show, all backing him up. And then a few notable undrafted guys to clear waivers. I mentioned Tyler Huntley and Nigel Warrior, both going to wind up on the practice squad. So an interesting cutdown day in Baltimore.
Right. And John Harbaugh kind of predicted it as it went. He said that they didn't anticipate a lot of waiver claims following the initial cuts from the 80 down to the 53 because there was no preseason. So guys like Tyler Colon Castillo that the Ravens ended up protecting for this week. Teams are allowed to protect up to 4 practice squad players every week. I think they have to list new ones every week, if I'm correct. I believe I am. And anyway, so they didn't think that there would be a lot of their guys getting, picked up, scooped up off the waivers. So it ended up working out for them. They got to keep everyone that they wanted to. No one made any waiver claims on any cut Ravens. They end up having Jaleel Scott on the short end of the stick. He goes up to the Jets as Joe Douglas just can't get enough, man. Just can't get enough. I guess he just likes the work ethic or the, study habits and environment in Baltimore and wants to try and get as much of that as possible so that maybe it kind of permeates into the Jets locker room if you have enough of them. I'm not sure if they're doing that. There might be other teams they're doing that with that we're just not paying attention to too. So maybe that's kind of his little strategy to take the guys that don't end up making the cut from more stable organizations and see if they can rub off on the locker room there. But anyway, yeah, they end up keeping all those linebackers. I'm not calling the undrafted streak over yet because of this weird COVID year. If the Ravens have a guy from the practice squad, maybe Colon Castillo, end up on the game day roster, if they make the game day roster, then I'm continuing the streak myself, and you can't tell me otherwise. But it was interesting to see, and it feels like they navigated it really well. And the 5 linebackers, I mean, Otaro Alaka was really great in preseason last year. They ended up stashing him on the IR all year. He seems like a good thumper downhill to kind of support Malik Harrison in that role. And then, of course, Chris Board, who's made heavy contributions on special teams. Last year in training camp, Chris Board was tearing it up. He was doing a really great job. Ended up getting a really bad concussion towards the end of preseason in the last preseason game or two. Can't recall which one. And then had a kind of funky start to the year. Seems like he was a little out of place after that. I know from personal experience, a concussion can really mess you up for a couple months. Some of those heavier ones with migraines and things, and you just feel a little wonky for a while. Eventually, I was able to at least come out of it, but those things can linger. So hopefully Chris Board's able to make a nice impact. Maybe he sees the field a bit. And yeah, that linebacker room's looking pretty hardy as of now. Some younger guys that all have opportunities to really prove themselves and earn snaps. If they play well in games and play well in special teams, they'll be safe and find a spot on the team this year. So the confidence that I have in the linebacker room is still in question a bit, which is funny because last year I felt very certain about Peanut and Kenny Young kind of manning those 2 roles. And boy, oh boy, did that not turn out well. So interested to see. We actually had Wink Martindale, the coaches were on conference today, the coordinators were on conference, and he was saying, Wink Martindale was saying he expects Patrick Queen to get really swung at by the Browns. He thinks they're going to take some shots at him, probably to Sean Elliott as well. So it's going to be sink or swim fast, as Patrick Queen's probably going to have to walk into the fan, so to speak, and see what they can do. But yeah, overall cuts wise, great job by the Ravens retaining all the guys they wanted to. They navigated this circumstance very well, in my opinion, as they just knew that no one was going to claim guys that didn't have any tape out.
Yeah, which is kind of what's the interesting part about having no preseason. You got to think that if a guy like Huntley went in there and kind of tore it up a little bit, at least for preseason standards, or if a guy like Warrior was showing out in preseason the way that he was in practice, you'd think maybe they get picked up to go to another practice squad or maybe another roster, depending on what teams are trying to do. But ultimately, maybe that wound up working in their favor with some of these guys winding up on the practice squad, and with practice squads in general just being really weird this year, where Josh McCown, for example, is going to be living in Texas on the Eagles practice squad, ready to go in case COVID should strike them in a strange way. Same thing going on with Brandon Carr there in Dallas, an old Ravens friend who people were maybe looking at as a guy who could have come back here to step in to the secondary to not necessarily replace Earl Thomas, but provide a little bit of supplemental depth there. Not going to happen as he is signing with Dallas practice squad. So a little bit of a weird spot to be in, but we certainly expected it. And cut downs have now come and gone. And it was very, very stock, which is to be expected, I guess.
Yeah, it made sense. They didn't make any risky moves. They didn't make any big splash. And it makes sense that, talking back to the Clowney point and then thinking how they approach this preseason non-preseason situation, training camp situation, they're going to test the waters first. It feels guys they trust their offseason evaluation process, the guys they brought in. And again, in the second year, we'll see if there is a huge shortcoming of this Ravens team. And it feels like it might come across the offensive line, the linebacker room, or the DB's room in terms of safety. Then Eric DeCosta is just going to make something happen and try and patch it up as quickly as possible without breaking the bank. And that's what he did last year. It worked out so well. So he's going to try and return to that well. And does that mean it will work this time? I'm not sure. It might be more difficult to do something like that in this COVID situation that the league is in and the way that things have turned out. So might not be as reliable this year to try that sort of see and then fix it later approach, but it worked last year. So why not try it again, I suppose, is the logic there. But hopefully they don't get to that point. Hopefully they're just a rock star team and they're solid, and that's the goal.
Yeah, certainly. So moving on from that, we wanted to go ahead and take a look ahead at the schedule, do a little bit of a season preview as we head into week one here. So it definitely snuck up on us. It at least snuck up on me that at the start of this week, I was like, wait a minute, it's week one. Did you have the same feeling?
Yeah, I've been waiting for it for a long time. I've been looking at the week one matchups for a couple weeks, but still, it just doesn't matter. It gives you a little extra juice, a little pip in your step when week one rolls around and, we get this Thursday night football. And I know I'm just going to get really nervous. I get like a little sick in my stomach, like Saturday night, Sunday morning, usually can't sleep because I get so damn excited. And it's just knowing that all the football coverage is going to come on in the morning. So I don't have to work with SIS this Sunday morning, but I will be working during and through the Ravens game. So I'll kind of be a little bit back and forth, but I still get that nervous feeling, and it happens every year and before big games too sometimes. But it's excitement, it's jitters, it's all that, and just knowing that we have football for the next couple of months. Hopefully, if the teams all are able to continue navigating the COVID situation successfully, it will be awesome, and that's what we need. We need football right now in America.
Yeah, we certainly do. Things are definitely popping off a little bit here as the year is sort of weirdly coming to a close, entering September now. Got 4 months of football in front of us, so that's going to be very nice. Little distraction from all the stuff that has gone on this year. But yeah, I mean, in that sense, with everything that it has been going on in 2020, it definitely snuck up on me. I'm kind of already getting that nervous feeling in my stomach that you mentioned. I'm just kind of that way. I'm a little bit of an anxious fan. But, you got week one coming up on Sunday. Nice little palatable home game against the Browns that we're going to be touching on. But as far as the entirety of the season goes, wanted to touch on a little bit of a record prediction because we really haven't done anything like that quite yet. I know you were going off on it a little bit on Twitter today, yesterday, whatever. I've been looking at it a little bit as well. What is your ultimate record prediction here for the Ravens?
So I'm going 12-4. I've thought about this one, and for whatever reason, just like without looking at the schedule, my gut tells me like 11-5 and maybe even 10-6. Feel like there is just a lot of uncertainty this season. There might be some surprising teams. And that's the thing about doing these like full year record predictions. Injuries happen, all that stuff. But on paper, I have them 12-4. The loss is coming against the Chiefs because I just think fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I had them winning both of those games in Kansas City. And I'm not gonna do it a third time. As J. Cole says, essentially, I'm gonna unload the chopper. If I pick the Ravens and they lost again, I would feel very foolish. So until proven otherwise, I think the Chiefs can handle the Ravens. So that's the first loss I have them taking. I have them splitting with Pittsburgh and Cleveland. I have them winning in week 1 against Cleveland and then losing the later one. I think the Browns will be able to get hot under Stefanski, who will have them much more disciplined and functioning better. And Cleveland might kind of fall behind the 8 ball at first and then get things really going after a couple weeks of live action. So I had the Browns beating them in a more meaningful game for Cleveland, kind of the opposite of what happened last year, essentially. Then I have them losing to Pittsburgh in Baltimore and then ruining Thanksgiving in Pittsburgh. And finally, I took a one that I feel like gets a little bit of flack, which is them losing in Indy. I'm just very high on Indy, who I have as a playoff team as well. So if Phillip Rivers gives them above average quarterback play, in my opinion, they have a great offensive line. They got DeForest Buckner. They have some really exciting front 7 pieces. Malik Harrison, their DBs have held up relatively well in that scheme. And I think they have a lot of weapons with Jonathan Taylor, who I have been watching a lot of for SIS. I was doing some training stuff and they had us use a couple Wisconsin games, and he made so many people miss at the line of scrimmage. It's underrated how elusive he is and how great he is at cutting. So not to go on too much of a Colts tangent there, but I just think the Colts have a lot of potential if they can get above average quarterback play. And so I had them losing there, and those are the 4 losses. I think this is the year that the Ravens finally win a playoff game, but I am not prepared to have them, go to the Super Bowl or win the Super Bowl. So I ended up having Pittsburgh, I think. It was like Pittsburgh in the wild card, the Raiders in the wild card, the Colts win their division, the Titans in the wild card, and then the Chiefs and the Bills. I'm very big on the Bills this year. I think if Josh Allen's just a little bit more accurate deep, they can hit on some Stephon Diggs stuff. And the Bills were a really good team last year. And with the Patriots missing Dante Hightower and Patrick Chung, as well as a couple other guys opting out there, it feels like people are really high on them, but that feels like too much to overcome. The loss of Brady plus all those opt-outs, that's a really tough situation. And I think they're still a competitive team that can win on any given Sunday. But I ended up having KC going to the Super Bowl, beating the Ravens in the AFC Championship, because as I said, I am not picking Ravens to beat the Chiefs until I see it happen. So that is my opinion on that side. And then I had the Cardinals coming out of the NFC as the 1 seed, which worked out really strangely. I don't think that will actually happen, but when I went through and did all 32 teams and picked game by game, they ended up as the 1 seed. I think they're a 9-7, 10-6, 11-5 football team this year, and the other teams were just a mess, kind of. The NFC South is super tough to predict, but I ended up having the Saints come out against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. The Saints have had such heartbreak over the last 6 seasons, losing in those, last minute drives every single year. Like, they didn't just get blown out one game and the Saints could be like, all right, they shit the bed. Like, at least Ravens fans, like, the Ravens lost emphatically. So we're not like, it's not that heartbreak. It's just disappointment.
We can't turn an entire off season into just us bitching about like X thing. And then that ruins part of the next season for every other team.
Exactly. That's dreadful. But at the same time, that has happened to them year after year, so you can't blame them for overreacting.
No, listen, I get it. I love the Saints. I mean, I'm, kind of from
you got that bio blood.
Yeah, they're sort of my second team a little bit, but let's calm down just a tad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, last year it felt like they were just like, all right, shit, nothing we can do there. They're used to it. So I think the Saints go all in. They're trying to go all in on Clowney. Let's see if they make another move similar to the Ravens, because after this, Breeze is, I think this is probably Drew Brees last year, if I had to guess. I'd be pretty surprised to see him play another season next year, but I wouldn't entirely rule it out. But I'm kind of wishful thinking a little bit on the Saints. And I had the Packers winning the NFC North by default, kind of. The Vikings I was really high on, but then with Danielle Hunter injured and just kind of thinking about maybe if they can't generate a ton of pass rush, then Michael Pierce, he opts out, and the secondary not being the best. Like, if they get Neil Hunter back and he's fully go and they have Ngakoue, they could end up being a 13-3 football team. But I had 10-6, I believe. And then the NFC South was just, insane to try and predict. The Panthers feel like a really crappy team because of their youth on defense. They had a higher defensive draft of rookies. They didn't draft any offensive players. So it feels like they're going to be too young defensively in a COVID-plagued season to implement what they wanted to do. I feel like their offense can be efficient. Nice little dink and dunk offense that has big play after the catch kind of guys with McCaffrey and Moore and Samuel and Anderson. But Bridgewater not known for the deep ball. So I see a lot of quick passing, a lot of McCaffrey usage. Obviously, I had like 3-13 or 4-12, somewhere along there. But the Bucs are a real wrench to try and predict this year, I feel like, with Brady and everything. So I ended up having the Bucs win the division at 11-5, tied with the Saints at 11-5. Then I had the Falcons just missing the playoffs at 9-7, I believe. And I think the Falcons could be a good team this year.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of the same way on the Falcons. As far as the NFC, I believe I had it Saints 1, Vikings 2. What else did I have? I had Niners 3, I believe. And then NFC East, I had the Cowboys. So, yeah. And then the wild card I didn't take a look at. But as far as AFC goes, I had Chiefs 1. Ravens I had 2, but I have them at 11-5. So it's kind of a strange number 2 seed there a little bit. I had Bills as the 3rd seed. 4th, I had Colts. So I'm kind of with you there on the Colts. As far as the Ravens goes, their records 11-5. I'm with you in that I have them splitting with the Chiefs and the Browns and the Steelers, winning at home in each of them, losing away in each of them, losing to the Chiefs in week 3. I'm with you on that. You got to prove it to me before you actually, go out and do it. Losing one to the Colts. So that is 4 right there. And then I had them losing to the Patriots, I believe. I think, or wait, is that, yeah, that's away, right, in Foxborough. So yeah, I had them losing that one to have an 11-5 record. I think they finish out 3-0 down that pretty easy stretch. So they're going to be sitting at like 8-5. Maybe questioning a little bit, not necessarily, but it's going to be different than it was last year, where by that point they're just steamrolling teams. I have them finishing out win over Jacksonville, Giants, and Bengals to get to 11-5 in that number 2 seed.
Yeah, I think I had them number 3. I think I had the Bills as the 1 seed. They have a really easy schedule and then a weak division for the most part, unless the Patriots end up somehow being a juggernaut despite all those losses and turnover. I think I had the Chiefs 2, Ravens 3, and Colts 4, somewhere along those lines. So the Ravens get a couple of home playoff games, then had to go into Kansas City in my scenario. And feels like this is the year they at least win a playoff game, and that would be a major step forward. We brought it up in the Slack chat. If this season results in the Ravens not winning a playoff game, where does that leave, John Harbaugh? As it feels like Roman is, if the Ravens get a high seed again, feels like there is no way in hell that Greg Roman is not a head coach somewhere else next year, and potentially Wink Martindale as well. Unless, obviously I just might not want to do that, which is a dream scenario, but it feels foolish to think that they wouldn't if they're offered a really good job that they've kind of coveted. So if they lose a game, where does that leave John Harbaugh? And it feels like his seat gets a little warm, like just a tiny bit warm. I don't think that they let him go after this, because if the Ravens win the division 3 straight years, you can't cut somebody, it feels like, or, part ways with the head coach. But again, the following season, if there's no playoff success, if it's 2 more years of that, I feel like Harbaugh will be out. And that's, a far cry away from where we are today, standing here. For all we know, the Ravens don't even make the playoffs this year. Who knows? Who knows what can happen injury-wise, all those kinds of things. So it's a difficult situation. And I mean, last year, Mike Tomlin ended up being, considered for coach of the year after Ben Roethlisberger goes down. The Steelers didn't even make the playoffs. So situations like that can happen, but it feels if they don't win a playoff game this year without, overwhelming circumstances that prevent them from maybe reaching the postseason or things like that, then kind of puts the Ravens in a weird spot of what do you want to do? And I feel like Bisciotti loves that continuity aspect. He's spoken about how he likes to model the Ravens after the Steelers, who have only had 4 head coaches in some 70 odd years. So it feels like they're not going to do that route exactly, but it's just a funky situation if the season ends in something other than at least 1 playoff win.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly weird. I couldn't really see that happening, especially if they do make the playoffs. It just, like, my question is, where is the basis of questioning coming from? Is it, okay, can this guy get it done? Well, yeah, he can get it done. Like, he did it. So, I mean, we're talking about a coach that's already won a Super Bowl, 5 straight years of playoffs. But not only that, then the pretty much 5 years of mediocrity and irrelevance after that, Bisciotti still didn't want to move on. So I think if your biggest problem is 3 straight years of making the playoffs and not getting it done, I just don't really think the questions are even going to arise, to your point. Like you said, he wouldn't necessarily be fired this year, but maybe the next. I don't even think the line of questioning would start until like next year. I think Bisciotti values that continuity so much. And I'm not even saying it's a question of whether should, would, or, whatever the situation is. I just think knowing Bisciotti, I think he loves Harbaugh, wants to hang on to him as much as possible. And he doesn't want to get rid of him until his hand is truly, truly forced. And he pretty much at this point has so much stuff to point to, including the Super Bowl win, including the fact that he kind of got jobbed a little bit having to hang on to Flacco on the contract, including the fact that he transitioned from Flacco to Lamar as smoothly as any head coach has probably done with any QB transition. And then if it were 3 straight years of playoffs, I really couldn't see it happening. But it's an interesting dilemma.
Right. It just starts to, people are going to start to ask questions. And especially, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's kind of difficult because the Ravens have been so visibly flat entering the postseason and clearly have such a talented roster. And while Harbaugh is responsible for a lot of that, if the Ravens come out flat again, lose at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the football again, and, get ran on, can't run the ball, can't stop the run, not getting pressure on the quarterback, getting pressured when they're on offense, it falls onto coaching eventually. And unfortunately, I feel like Harbaugh has to take the blame there. And you're right. The blame might not be heavy enough. And it's a good problem. Is our coach going to get us to the Super Bowl after winning the division 3 years in a row and falling short? That's more of a good problem to have than a bad one. But it just can cause a lot of frustration in a coach that's been with the Ravens for a while. So just a weird circumstance that's possible this season if they do have history repeat itself over the last 2 years and end up getting in there. But again, I don't feel that's the case. I agree with you. It feels like this team now is experienced instead of just young. They're both young and experienced. So they have had, Ronnie Stanley, a guy who's a premier left tackle, he's had 2 playoff games under his belt now. His feet are wet. Orlando Brown as well. And Mark Andrews had a couple experience, all these guys, Marlon Humphrey, Lamar, obviously, a lot of those guys. So it feels like they have what it takes and have the experience, the skin in the game that I always love to say is there. They've suffered. And it feels like the Ravens, in order to, win that Super Bowl back in the 2012 season, had to suffer first. They had to fall short in New England. They had to, get beat by Pittsburgh a couple times in the playoffs. They had to really work and strive and keep at it year after year for a few years there for, those 5 years of under Harbaugh until they got that Super Bowl. And like you said, it's such a good point that the mediocrity they fell into and Harbaugh bringing them out of that to the point they reached last year shows that he's not stale like a lot of people questioned. He's not an old dog in the game. He stayed innovative, stayed at the top of the game. They bring in analytics guys, have a renowned analytics team as well now. Their offense is at the forefront of what football's doing with the RPOs and things like that. So he has stayed fresh despite, kind of rumors that he was getting stale. A lot of that might have had to do with the offensive situation and some things. And this year's a big year for the Ravens in terms of not really, and this was brought up the other day to me, I believe on Twitter, but bringing in Calais Campbell, bringing in Derek Wolfe, those are not the veterans that they bring in that people have complained about. Those guys aren't Michael Crabtree, they're not those kind of guys. Calais Campbell is an elite defender still, top 20 defender, 30 defender in the entire NFL. And Derek Wolfe is only 30 and has been successful. And it feels like they opted with youth this year in a lot of situations, especially that receiver room. They didn't panic. They were like, all right, we're going to see if what we drafted and brought in pays off. They are relying on these younger-ish guys and these younger guys to be what they expected them to be when they acquired them. So they haven't tried to use those classic aging veteran band-aids of that mediocre run that they went on. So it feels like this is an important year for the Ravens in terms of trusting their evaluation process in the draft and with rookies and younger players as opposed to those classic Ravens band-aids. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, listen, and not to rag on Ozzie, but he had a couple rough years there where he misjudged what he had, particularly at receiver and on offense, and it really cost them. And it cost Harbaugh, I think. That's part of why they fell into that mediocrity. There were some games maybe where Harbs didn't get them up for it, and he, I think, readily admitted to that he just kind of didn't have them ready for some of the mediocre teams that they dropped games against during that run. But ultimately, I mean, you look at what happened in 2018. They had a decently talented roster. They go 10-6, win the division, make the playoffs. You look at this past year, they had a pretty damn talented roster, 14-2, win the division, losing the playoffs again. But ultimately, to your point, the questions are definitely going to be asked. They're going to be asked if he doesn't win a playoff game. It's just a process versus results type thing where the Ravens are process-based, media is reactionary. Obviously, they're going to be, looking at the results, which is understandable. That's just what the media does. And I think the hot seat, as it were, is going to exist in the minds of the media, but not in the minds of Harbaugh. should nothing happen in the playoffs yet again this season. And ultimately, for a guy like him, that's unfortunately just always going to be the case, because he does not really bring, if you think about it, he doesn't bring much of a tangible value in the eyes of people in the media specifically. He doesn't coordinate the offense. He doesn't coordinate the defense. He's a special teams guy. He's Ray-Ra, motivator, CEO type. And as much as that has value within a building, it doesn't have much value outside of a building where somebody looks at them and says, well, what does this guy actually do? Because you got Greg Roman there doing a great job with the offense. You got Wink Martindale doing an equally good job with the defense. And then here's this guy just kind of in the middle. What does he do? Well, he does a ton of things that you don't see outside of the building as a media member, but they're not less valuable all the same.
Put Greg Roman and Wink Martindale in their position after they kind of got backlogged after they were unsuccessful. Not even Greg Roman wasn't even unsuccessful, but you know where I'm going with it.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's another good point, that you look at a guy like Wink Martindale, who had a very rough stint as a defensive coordinator for just the one time that he got a crack at it in Denver. Not the popular hire at the time to promote the guy from in-house after a very high-profile guy left that position before him. And then Greg Roman, I mean, he had a little bit of a fall from grace there in Buffalo. I mean, those offenses weren't looking especially pretty towards the end of his tenure. So a guy whose stock was very much on the downslide. But that's another thing that he did well, was build a staff around him, not be intimidated by the fact that they're two smart, established football minds. And they're both kind of doing their thing, and he's doing his. Like I said, in a way that's not going to get a ton of glory or attention from the media all the time, but is important all the same.
Exactly. And we talk about the executive type coaches versus the X's and O's coaches, and there's examples of good ones and bad ones all across the board. And that's such a valuable thing, picking the right guys to delegate power to, kind of like the President of the United States, picking the right cabinet, surrounding yourself with successful people that are the right person for the job, not taking too many risks in that way, making sure that you have a safe, consistent, a successful business model, essentially, that's sustainable with selecting coaches and decisions that you make. And, some of those big decisions, I mean, sticking with Lamar Jackson as a rookie who was errant but electric at the same time was a tough decision. And the Ravens maybe he gets fixed if he doesn't stick with, let's say that they don't stick with Lamar Jackson, Joe Flacco comes back in, the Ravens end up 8-8, missing the postseason. Maybe John Harbaugh is not the coach of the Baltimore Ravens last year or at this point, if he didn't make that tough decision. And at the end of the day, that boiled down to him. And so often, I mean,
not to interrupt you too much there, but he was on his way out. Like, he was gone. Like, it had been reported that it was already, they had mutually agreed to part ways. He's just going to bring Jackson in and they're just going to see it through to the end. They lose one game after that happens. And he saved his job, goes 14-2 the next year. I mean, I think that speaks to kind of the fortitude that you're dealing with this guy, where we talk about, like, he's a little corny sometimes and he has all these weird sayings, and he's just got this great dad energy that maybe doesn't, there's not the cool factor of somebody like a Sean McVay, and you don't really have the same kind of quirk and offensive genius that you do with somebody like Andy Reid. But there's just an it factor, I think, with John Harbaugh, that as much as, people kind of want to rag on him, and, like Voss is big on talking about how culture is really not as important as he makes it out to be. Yeah, maybe. But like, at the same time, I think there is a lot of inherent value that is not easy to, discern.
Couldn't disagree with Voss more on that one. It's culture. The culture is the same thing as having a sustainable business model, in my opinion. Culture is part of that. That's what the word culture means in relevance to football. And I generally disagree with that. But like you said, he's not exciting in that way. But we also don't. So this is what I was thinking of. Let's say that doomsday type scenario, in a way, well, it's not maybe the worst to win the division still. I'm calling it doomsday just because it would be really frustrating if the Ravens go one and done in the playoffs again. But as much time as you and I and everyone else spends trying to analyze why that might be, at the end of the day, John Harbaugh isn't going to tell us why it happened. Steve Bisciotti's not going to tell us why it happened. Eric DeCosta's not going to tell us why it happened. They keep it in-house always. We didn't even know that Earl Thomas got fined somehow twice. They keep that shit in-house. And it feels like if that does happen, we won't know who is truly at blame, because they are so tight-lipped, unless there's an anomaly and someone isn't tight-lipped, and that would be an outlier. That doesn't happen in Baltimore often. So, if that happens, the conversations will be had in-house between the executives, the head coach, and the owner. And who is at fault? We won't even really know. Some people point the blame at Greg Roman for the debacle against the Titans, and being unwilling to stick with the ground game when they were down by one score and things like that. And other people point fingers here and there, but they know who's at fault, and they are not going to blame anyone that is not part of that Baltimore Ravens culture. And that's why guys want to come there. They want to come to Baltimore because they know they're not going to get, put on blast unless they truly deserve it. Earl Thomas, we didn't know there was a problem with Earl Thomas. Some of the insiders had some rumblings and things like that, but we didn't know there was a problem until it exploded. But we didn't realize that explosion wasn't out of nowhere. It was a long time coming. It was, basically inevitable almost. So, but that's kind of all my thoughts on Harbaugh and things like that. Still love the hell out of the guy as a football coach. Think he does a great job preparing practice. He's very efficient, well organized. And those are the things that people don't understand what is important for a head coach to do. He is the one who has to delegate all of the responsibilities first, have a good system of being able to make sure that, the people he's put in power, his coaches and assistant coaches, are doing their job. You have to be able to basically check up on them successfully and evaluate them properly during the season, keep practice on schedule, make decisions, big time decisions during the game, as well as, the huge decisions like, do we stick with the rookie or go with the Super Bowl MVP, those kinds of things. And I feel like Harbaugh has a pretty good track record. While no one bats 1,000, it's impossible to. He has a pretty good track record at those big time decisions, and making the paradoxical shift when he needed to Jackson did potentially save his job. And Calvin Wooden comments on here, it's crazy that John Harbaugh was even considered on the hot seat in general. And I agree. He took some crappy, mediocre rosters and made them playoff contenders almost the entirety. They only played one meaningless football game there when it was it was after the Steelers Christmas game. What was that, 2016?
2016, yeah, when they went to go play the Bengals, Steve Smith's last game.
Right. That was the only meaningless football game they played with a completely lackluster roster. So a lot of credit to Harbaugh for being able to keep them afloat during a rebuild. Build it. They did like instead of what the Jaguars are doing, having a fire sale, firing people, doing all this stuff, they kind of did like a 1/3 3-year rebuild and remain competitive, and it kept fans in seats, and Harbaugh was able to weather that. And you use that word fortitude, and I really like that. I really like that one word to describe John Harbaugh. In one word, John Harbaugh has fortitude as a head coach, and I really like that. So it's a good way of putting it, and I feel like that sums up my thoughts on John Harbaugh going into the season.
Yeah, just real quick on it. I mean, ultimately, a lot of the stuff you touched on there is very good, and fortitude, I think, is the right word. And this is about them getting more into the analytics game and that kind of stuff. I hate to kind of keep sounding like an analytics, like corporate slogan sounding board, but this is about being process-based versus results-based. The Ravens are a process-based organization. They don't look at results and say, okay, like this happened, so we have to do this. X happened, so we don't have to do Y, so we don't have to do Z. We go into Kansas City, go for it on 4th down 6 times. It doesn't work. We're just done doing that because the result didn't work. No, we liked our process. We didn't win the game, but we feel like 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10, maybe it works out in our favor. So we're going to stick to our process, and that worked for them. John Harbaugh loses in the playoffs again, first time. We're going to stick to our process, and eventually we think it's going to work. And that's how you get to a point where, say in 2017, you look at a result that happened at the end of the season, a disappointing loss. You lose in a freezing, cold game that you should have won. And ultimately, you're just in a very bad spot. Let's say you win that game. You don't get Lamar Jackson. And if you lose the game and you fire Harbaugh as a result of that, then you maybe don't get Lamar Jackson as well. And you don't get this turnaround. You don't get a team that, wins 24 games over the course of 2 years. And, they bow out in the playoffs. But ultimately, if you just stick to that process, I think ultimately you're going to get the result that you're seeking. So like I mentioned, not to keep harping on this and sounding like some sort of soundboard, but I think ultimately the Ravens are just going to trust the process.
Trust the process. The old Sixers strategy. But yeah, I agree with a lot of those points. And Ben Rose chimes in, painful Mark Trestman offenses, right? And that was an example of him maybe not putting the right person in the right position, but got rid of him, and could tell based on the process that was happening, as well as the results in that situation. But
not enough about an offense that is trying to feature Brashad Perryman as like a number 2 wide receiver. So, Mark Trestman didn't love his offenses, but to be fair to the guy, another dude who did not necessarily benefit from Ozzy's decision-making near the end there.
Absolutely. Great point. But yeah, let's get into this Browns game.
Absolutely. So Sunday, 1 p.m., Cleveland Browns coming into Baltimore. Baker Mayfield seeking a bounce-back season under new head coach Kevin Stefanski. You got offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt there under him. Brown's very talented on offense yet again. Added a couple pieces along that offensive line. You got Jedrick Wills coming in at, I believe he's going to be playing left tackle, and then you got Conklin playing right tackle. Couple additions, couple familiar faces that you're expecting a bounce back from. What are you expecting to see from Cleveland's offense this Sunday under Kevin Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt? Stefanski clearly being, purposefully vague about who's going to be calling the plays, but for all intents and purposes, the offense that he was running with Minnesota there and Kirk Cousins last season.
Absolutely. I believe that Kevin Stefanski is like you said, it's a good example of the Browns subscribing to, as you put it, the process-based decision-making as opposed to result. They hired Freddie Kitchens after the results of Freddie Kitchens, but they ignored the process. A guy who didn't have experience, who probably wasn't showing something that was going to be sustainable in his method, especially putting him at the head coach position. So at this point, we end up seeing Kevin Stefanski come in from Minnesota, and Kevin Stefanski did an outstanding job last year. He had Gary Kubiak come in, who I believe is now the Vikings offensive coordinator, if I'm mistaken. I think he is. I think he took over the full reign of it. So Stefanski does a lot of things similar to what we saw from the Ravens offense. It'll be more relatable to Ravens fans. When Gary Kubiak had that outstanding 2014 season, led Joe Flacco to by far his best regular season, and off to a really great postseason start there. Just couldn't get it done in New England, and that one was not to blame on Joe Flacco by any means. He had a great game in New England that day. But so the Browns ended up being a team that when they had Freddie Kitchens take over as play caller, part of that felt like a great decision, as maybe retaining him as offensive coordinator, because Baker Mayfield, and it ended up being true last season and leading to the demise of Freddie Kitchens. Baker Mayfield thrives in play action, heavier personnel, aside from 11 personnel. When the Browns were in 11 personnel last year, every single passing metric was significant. There was a significant drop off there between 11 personnel, 3 receivers, 1 tight end, obviously, and the 12 personnel, the 21, the 22. Baker does an outstanding job on play action. His play action metrics were all higher than his non-play action metrics. His boots, his outside of the pocket throwing was among the best in the NFL. Baker Mayfield has a laser and throws a beautiful deep ball. He's a very accurate deep passer. And the Browns simply didn't take enough of those, play action, set up, get Baker in space shots. And it feels like he does a poor job managing the pocket with his feet, gets a little antsy and things that he's worked on. But in that Oklahoma offense, his offensive line was so damn dominant that he wasn't under pressure as much. So teams maybe didn't get the best read on that situation. But now going ahead and looking at what Stefanski does, because the Vikings last year in 2019 with Stefanski at the helm, they ran 11 personnel at the lowest rate of any team in the NFL. They were 32nd in usage of 11 personnel. So what does that say? Browns are probably going to not run as much 11 personnel. Then let's look at who they brought in on the offensive side of the football this year. You mentioned Jedrick Wills, who is a nasty son of a gun at Alabama. He was the right tackle for Alabama, but Tua Tagovailoa is a lefty. So he is kind of the left tackle in that way. And obviously, it's works mechanically differently with the human body, kick sliding with your feet and it's inverted. So it is different a little bit. But he is used to being the blindside protector, and he was a damn good one. One of my favorite plays from Jedrick Wills last year, he depleted Marlon Davidson, who I also talked about on this podcast, had very strong opinion of him as a great player, put his ass in the dirt, put him on his back really, really well. A mauler, a guy who has good technique and great physical ability. He reminds me of a better version of Cody Ford, the former Oklahoma right tackle, who's now out in Buffalo, played a little guard last year. The Ravens saw him. So an interesting pickup there. Then they go ahead and get Jack Conklin, who is, while not maybe spectacular, he is consistent. He is a great run blocker. He is going to be a cog, and they now bookends. Jedrick Wills is probably going to be a good pro. The thing is, though, let's think about how great Ronnie Stanley is and how technically sound he is, how much of an athlete he is. Ronnie Stanley was not consistent as a rookie. It's really hard for rookie tackles, especially because tackles usually are on an island more so, to be consistent, to win consistently, to make the right decisions. And they end up seeing a lot more looks from defenses throughout one game. And everybody says, the rookies, the NFL comes at you fast, the play speed's different, yada, 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 all that cliche stuff, but it's true. So, Wills is probably still an improvement potentially from Greg Robinson last year. And then Conklin is definitely going to be an improvement there. So you got to look at that line that has 3 pretty above average to good, borderline elite guys there, and think that's a good 5-man group. So that's going to present some problems, not just for the Ravens, but for teams all year. I would imagine their offensive line is going to be among the top 10 in football this year, especially if they run the ball more and use less 11 personnel. That works in the favor of the offensive line always. So we look at that. We also look at Austin Hooper coming in. They end up drafting Harrison Bryant out of FAU, who's an athletic tight end, as well as retaining David Njoku, who wanted to be traded out, and the Browns refused. So what does that tell me? Tight end usage is going to be up. We're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets, maybe even some 3 tight end sets, probably a few of them this week. So when we go ahead and look at what the Browns are going to do on offense, it's going to be heavier personnel, running the football, play action, and getting Baker Mayfield in space. And last year, Kirk Cousins, who I think is, I wouldn't call him an unathletic guy, but I think he's, he was athletic enough to get in space, but I think Baker has a little bit more twitch, a little bit more of an athlete.
Doesn't quite have the juice that Baker has.
Exactly. So I think Baker's going to be able to hit those landmarks on some bootlegs and some rollouts a lot quicker and more effectively and be in a good position to throw. But that's kind of I just talked myself into poor logic because Kirk Cousins was incredible on those boots and rollouts last year. So it really doesn't even matter. Kirk was great mechanics. Very
talk
accurate.
about Kubiak and the influence on Stefanski there. I mean, you look at a guy like Joe Flacco, who was regularly kind of dunked on for having 0 athletic ability. I think that was a little overstated at the time, but he got into that Gary Kubiak offense. He was moving around a little bit, doing those rollouts, that play action stuff. I think you're going to be seeing a lot of that from the Browns this Sunday. You're going to be impressed with Baker Mayfield's athleticism.
Absolutely. So Baker, he has that juice. He's got that little bit of dog in him too. He can scrap around and he'll lower his shoulder occasionally and not look like a quarterback that shouldn't have lowered his shoulder. So I think that Baker is going to be a lot more effective in this offense. Where I find, and this goes for both sides of the ball and special teams, you can lump in there as well. It's really hard. I'm interested to see, and I could be completely wrong here, but I feel like it's really hard to hire an entirely new coaching staff, especially because this is the 3rd coaching staff in the past 3 years for the Browns. That means new terminology. That means, different adjustments based on the way you see things on the field. And it's hard in this COVID-plagued offseason where there was no mini camp and a weird training camp period. I feel like it's going to be hard for new head coaches and new coaches to effectively convey what they want done on the football field with no preseason games, less time on the field, not having mini camp, not having the guys in the building until much later than usual. So it feels like it's likely that those teams that don't have continuity coaching wise might struggle a little bit, and that might be league wide. And that doesn't mean that all of them will. So maybe the Browns are just good to go. That's, an X factor for me in this game is how well this offense can function without as much experience as typical. But Stefanski's been in the NFL for 20 years, I believe, somewhere around there. So he's not some, college coach, young buck hire. He's a veteran coach that has been around the NFL, knows what works, what doesn't. Probably a lot better than some of these new hires that are not nearly as experienced as he is. On the defensive side of the ball, they also brought in the 49ers defensive backs coach as their defensive coordinator, a very well-respected guy. That unit was great. But on the offensive side of the football, I feel like it's just going to come down to how well the Browns are prepared to execute what Kevin Stefanski's implemented. And if they're ready to do so, this could be a tough game for the Ravens for sure. I think it will be a tough game.
Yeah, for sure. Watching some of that Vikings tape, I've been doing that in the run-up to today. I was watching a little bit of that Saints playoff game that they played. Really liked what I saw from this offense. Very run-heavy, some inside zone stuff. A lot of stretches and tosses to the outside with Dalvin Cook and that other guy, 25. I don't have his name. Madison. Okay. Yeah, so really, really interesting offense. I think you're going to see Hooper playing that Kyle Rudolph role a little bit. Really interested to see what we get from Jarvis Landry in this game, because if you look at Diggs in that offense, it's a lot of the stuff where he's doing the motions going back and forth, whether they're giving it to him on a handoff, whether they're setting him up to run a wheel route or something like that, or they're setting it up to go the other way. He's going to be a part of that play action game as well as I think Odell is, who shout out to Odell, some interesting proclivities for him that were disclosed recently. We don't have to get into that. And then I think looking at Hooper and some of these guys that they're going to want to be taking advantage of, looking at Baker's next gen stats. This was in my article for this week called the dossier that I'm going to be trying to do in every week about the upcoming opponent, looking at Baker's next gen stats. That's throwing short to the right and intermediate and deep over the middle of the field. So I think that is going to mean a lot of heavy tight end usage, and I think it is going to be multiple tight ends. I think they were smart to hang on to Njoku, because he's going to give them a lot of that stuff that, frankly, he had already been giving them in the 5 years that he had been there. But excited about his role in this. And I think Hooper, as much as they maybe did overpay for him a little bit, I think he's going to excel in this offense, and at least from a production standpoint, pay them back nicely on that.
Right. And Hooper does get a huge contract, but it just shows maybe how much the Vikings and now the Browns. So in other words, Kevin Stefanski values a tight end that can do both, get you a girl that can do both, that can block a little bit, is going to be a nice security blanket over the middle, a bigger target, kind of similar to maybe a less explosive, but a little bit better blocker, Mark Andrews, which Baker Mayfield had at Oklahoma. So it feels like Hooper is going to be a nice security blanket. And I think they're going to dial up those deep shots, man. I think we're going to see Baker's yards per attempt and intended air yards per attempt. In other words, how far down the field he is throwing the ball every time he throws it, go up. Kirk Cousins was among the leaders last year with Stefanski, and Baker Mayfield was one of the most deep, accurate passers last year. And while the completion percentage might say otherwise and things like that, he threw catchable balls at a really high rate. And so there was drop off there. You got to put that on the receivers. But yeah, you mentioned Stephon Diggs. I see Odell Beckham in that role, running a lot of double moves, trying to get him in one-on-ones in space and get him on those deep shots. And then Jarvis Landry going to be a workhorse in those short and intermediate areas as well. And of course, we're going to see some Kareem Hunt, man. We're going to see some Kareem Hunt. Chubb obviously does what Chubb does, makes guys miss, is very elusive. But Kareem Hunt is a flawless pass catcher as a running back. Really, really, really strong. The Browns extended him, showing some confidence in him after the situation that he put himself in back in Kansas City that led to him going to Cleveland. And this offense is scary. This offense is pretty scary, especially if they're able to implement these things early on. So the Ravens are going to have their work cut out for them. Feels like talking about the Ravens defensive side of the ball in translation. You mentioned those zone plays. Stefanski and Kubiak both are proponents of zone blocking schemes. That is where you don't have someone pull. You just kind of have the offensive line work one way as a unit. And that is going to really, really, really allow Nick Chubb to try and get some cutback lanes and things like that. I think Kareem Hunt might fit that a little bit better. I think Chubb is a little bit better on power concepts. They will still run some power. They won't run exclusively zone. But if the Ravens are able to use Calais Campbell, who spoke about this week, essentially saying teams like the Browns and those outside run concepts, those stretch runs, outside zone, are the reasons why Patrick Queen, myself, and Derek Wolfe were brought in to Baltimore. Calais Campbell hits the nail on the head. The Browns slaughtered the Ravens outside of the hashes in the run game last year in that Week 4 matchup. That ended up with the Ravens having to retool the entire front, bring in Pecco, Ellis, Ward, all those guys. So with Wolf, with Campbell, with Patrick Queen, who, if he's kept clean, looks like he's put on a little bit of weight. He is masterful when he is kept clean at mirroring running backs. He keeps his lateral agility perfectly square to the running back, waits for the running back to make their move, is patient, at least it was at LSU. It's different in the NFL, of course, but was patient in waiting for the running back to really commit to a lane. And then that man runs a 4.5, comes downhill, and is a madman with his hair on fire. So if he's kept clean by that Ravens defensive front, Brandon Williams returns to the nose so he can beat up on centers. That is his God-given talent, is to just basically be a defensive center killer. And then Campbell and Wolf will provide more mobility and some more smarts than guys like Pierce and Wormley, who weren't outstanding. And then the rest of it's going to fall on those outside linebackers to really hold that edge and make sure that can't get sealed in. So if Patrick Queen is kept clean, he's going to be making some plays this week. And Wink Martindale said he expects him to be targeted, as I mentioned earlier. So that's going to be coming down to, it feels like they're going to probably try to test Queen as well as Deshaun Elliott, as Deshaun Elliott's taken over for Earl Thomas, and the Browns pretty much avoided throwing the ball over the middle of the field. And it feels like they might target Elliott a few times over the deep middle and intermediate middle, but on those boots and those rollouts and things that I'm expecting, the ball is going to go outside the hash quite a bit, to that kind of outside and then out, that middle outside and then outside range. So I would expect some deep shots, some one-on-ones. Feels like OBJ was really frustrated by Marlon Humphrey last year, and OBJ was injured last year, and they're going to want to test what this Ravens secondary can hold up on those deep balls this year. So should be a very interesting battle chess-wise between these two teams, and it's a system the Ravens are familiar with, that kind of Kubiak system. So it's going to be fun to see how if the Ravens are able to win up front, game's over, in my opinion. That's the key to the game here, is Ravens being able to get penetration into the backfield on run plays and get pressure on Baker Mayfield. If they do that relatively consistently. I feel like the Ravens run away with this one.
Yeah, hashtag keep Queen clean, and you're going to need to do that because Stefanski does play that poker game. He's doing a lot of that stretch and toss stuff to the outside, and some of the Saints linebackers, like I was talking about in that game, like Anzalo and some of these guys, just not really able to play the game quite up to that standard. So I think if he does, then you're going to be right in that it shuts down a lot of the other stuff they're trying to do with the boot action and splitting the field in half for Baker. I think it's going to make it much more difficult on him. But yeah, man, I guess that's enough on their offense versus Baltimore's D. Let's switch over to the other side. So you got some familiar faces returning. Myles Garrett, fresh off of a notorious suspension. He's going to be lining up there at that DN spot. Olivier Vernon coming back as well. Other than that, they have had some losses. Grant Delpit was probably going to be starting for them at safety. They made a quick move to re-solidify that spot by trading for Ronnie Harrison, who was on the Jaguars, formerly out of Alabama. So it's kind of an interesting hodgepodge. Grady Williams is going to be at the mix at cornerback there. Denzel Ward probably still their top alpha dog. But how do you sort of, take a look at this matchup, and who do you think sort of has the advantage here in Ravens offense versus the Browns D?
I think the Browns have a really impressive defensive front. Talking Garrett, Richardson, Ogunjobi, and Vernon across their defensive front. Those guys are all gap penetrators. They're going to shoot one gap. They're going to try and get them upfield, make plays. Richardson can definitely two gap in that situation. Ogunjobi a bit as well, but those guys are going to be a handful. But outside of that, I know that Mack Wilson is banged up. I'm not sure if he's going to play. Their linebacking core is very young, very inexperienced. They lose Joe Schobert, who played really well against Baltimore last year in week 4. And then you mentioned that injury in the secondary to Greedy Williams, as well as Grant Delpit. And they're being replaced. They essentially don't really have a free safety type guy, which is going to be really difficult for them against the Ravens, in my opinion. That means they might have to rely on some more. If they don't, they're going to get burned. I don't think Sendejo and Carl Joseph and Ronnie Harrison are really center fielders, so to speak. So I think they're going to have to go with a lot of too high coverage. And while they might disguise it and drop back into it, the Ravens will run the ball against too high. And the linebackers aren't great. They're going to probably try to put extra hats to get some zone and some duo, double teams on wherever they're running, whether it's Garrett or Richardson or Ogunjobi or Vernon. Browns also do have Adrian Claiborne, who's an experienced veteran from Atlanta, who was very good at one point in time. But Sion Takitaki could be a little bit of a surprise here. I really, really loved his tape in college. He is a classic, Polynesian defender with his hair on fire in the vein of Troy Polamalu. Dude plays like he is sped the hell up. He can overcommit to things, but he's looking for those big hits and those crazy fast plays where he kind of plays faster than he can actually run. But I think that the Ravens will be able to take advantage of the Browns secondary a bit. Denzel Ward, I imagine, is going to probably follow Hollywood around a bit, but that's going to leave some one-on-ones against some subpar corners for Miles Boykin and for Snead and maybe Devin Duvernay and some of those guys. So I think that the Ravens should be able to capitalize through the air unless this offensive line just can't handle the Browns pass rush of those 4 dudes. Browns blitz a bit, but not a ton. Coming from San Francisco, I'm not entirely sure if their defensive coordinator is going to straight up try to replicate what the 49ers did last year. That's going to be a lot of 4-man rushes, not a ton of blitzes, but obviously they'll blitz some. And then a lot of cover 3 and, a lot of cover 3 and quarters, kind of keeping the corners on one side of the field, not having them shadow. But with Denzel Ward being so much better to shadow or to just in general as a cornerback than, Terrence Mitchell and Kevin Johnson and some of these other guys that they have in the DB room, I think they're going to have to stick him on Hollywood. And if they don't stick him on Hollywood, I think Hollywood's going to have 150 yards, 2 touchdowns again on week 1. Feels like he's ready to go crazy. So I think that the game, again, it's if the Ravens can cease the Browns defensive front from blowing the game up for them offensively, I think that the Ravens are going to put up 30 plus points. I think that I don't know. I don't know about this Ravens offensive line without Yanda. We still don't know who's starting at right guard. We don't even know who's starting. We basically only know at this point that Bradley Bozeman is starting somewhere, that Ronnie Stanley is starting, and that Orlando Brown is starting. Other than that, we do not know. Skura, who knows if he's ready to play or not, or if they're going to go with Makari or what the hell is going to go on. So if the Ravens struggle offensively in this game, it is going to be because the Browns defensive front just rips the Ravens offensive line apart. I don't think because of Ronnie Stanley and Orlando Brown being as talented as they are, I don't think they'll get dominated. But if the Browns can kind of consistently win there, this game's going to be a lot closer than people predict, especially Ravens fans. So Like I said, though, it's going to boil down to Lamar has time to throw the rock. It feels like this offense wants to prove how successful it can be as a passing offense, and they're going to try and rip. So it feels like the Ravens are going to put up at least 20 points. They're the only team in the NFL to score 500 points last year and led the NFL in scoring by quite a margin. And that loss of Marshall Yanda is huge. It feels like they took enough shots at the interior positions to get some average to above average starting quality play there. So if that's the case, I think the Ravens are able to, put up 27, 30 plus points here.
Well, the question is, could somebody like Aaron Rodgers do that? Because the defensive line, of course, including Sheldon Richardson, who doesn't expect Lamar Jackson to turn into Aaron Rodgers anytime soon. I expect them to do what they do best, and that's run the ball.
He's not wrong about that. They do like to run the ball, and that is what they do best. They just set the yards per carry and yards records. But as I put out on Twitter there, Aaron Rodgers did not throw the ball as well as Lamar Jackson last year. Let's bring Devontae Adams over to Baltimore and see what happens there. That would be my little happy thing. Let's see what. So the Ravens' leading receiver was a 5'9", 150-some pound receiver with 2 screws in his foot, and led the Ravens receivers in catches, yards, touchdowns, all that stuff. So quite a drop off there in terms of that. The Packers do have a good offensive line as well with Bakhtiari and a couple other studs there. So, I mean, maybe Lamar wasn't as good as what was it? 2011 Rodgers, was that the year he won MVP?
Yeah, and 14.
The 2011 one, that insane one. Lamar definitely didn't throw the ball as well as that one did, but Aaron Rodgers.
We don't have to break it down like comparison by comparison. It's just like, are we doing this again? Really? We're doing this again. We're doing this again. Like people are coming with the questions again. We're doing it again. We're doing this again. Evidently.
We're still here.
Oh man, they really are. What is he going to have to do for this to stop? Win a playoff game, I guess, right?
Yes. Win a playoff game. Then it stops. If he wins a playoff game this year, he hasn't won a Super Bowl in his first 3 seasons. Okay, cool. I don't care about that. It's just at this point, it's just good Lord. I don't think anyone who isn't just mouth regurgitation, just basically having diarrhea of the mouth, will look at what Lamar Jackson, the way he improved from Louisville into being a rookie into last year, and think that he is not going to be an even better passer than he was last year after leading the NFL in touchdown passes. His vision, his intangible vision as a quarterback, as kind of a point guard, is insane. He is a red zone monster, and he's going to shred. If he has time, he is going to shred. Even if he doesn't have time, he can make plays with his feet and still shred. He is a playmaker, plain and simple at this point. We all know it. There are just non-believers still, and that's okay. I mean, every single good player has detractors. There's people who don't think Michael Jordan, or people call Tom Brady a system quarterback, and Peyton Manning didn't win enough in the play. Whatever it is, there's just people who don't like certain players for whatever reason, and they want to be right, and it's confirmation bias, all that shit. And if you want to look at the other starting quarterbacks in the NFL and then pick on Lamar Jackson, I don't know what you think about fucking Sam Darnold and Jared Goff. Then I don't know what you have to say about that.
Shout out to our guy Orlovsky.
I don't know what you have to say about them. So yeah. I don't know. It's just kind of
and listen, I'm not trying to belabor the point. I'm not even really trying to go after Richardson. I don't totally think he was trying to take a shot at Lamar or anything. It's just it ignites these Twitter debates that my timeline just gets absolutely consumed by. And it's like, why do we have to do this? Like, can we just all relax a little bit? It's week 1. Football's back. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. Can we just try to enjoy something for once? Come on, Sheldon.
It's just belabored at this point. Also breaking out of the beat journalists, Zrebeck and Aaron Kasinitz, Tyree Phillips was not practicing today. So potentially going to be seeing DJ Fluker then at right guard, it sounds like.
Okay, so DJ Fluker probably at right guard. We just gave you our breakdown of how the offense stacks up against Cleveland's D. Anything else on this matchup before we get out of here?
Hollywood Brown, big day, especially if Denzel Ward doesn't shadow him.
Okay, I like that. And your score prediction?
Score prediction, I'm going to go 27-20 Ravens. I think that Browns hit a couple big plays, and, Ravens probably have some kinks to work out defensively. And other than that, feels like the offense will probably hum. The continuity is going to overmatch the Browns, bringing in an entirely new coaching staff, and coaching is so ever important, and having players all on the same page. So let's see what happens, but I'm going 27-20 Ravens.
Ravens 30, Browns 24. J.K. Dobbins scores a touchdown.
Love to hear it. I'm going to go Hollywood Brown over 100 and a touchdown.
Oh, I like that. Okay, well, that was pretty extensive. Anything else you want to add in?
Let's see. In the comments, nothing crazy. Aaron Askew asks, would you sacrifice the Browns game to win the Chiefs game? Yes, I really want the Ravens to beat the Chiefs. That would be great for business. And
they wind up at 2-1 by that point, I would say yes. Like if they beat the Texans as well.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to be 1-2. But the final thing, we're doing a $50 Venmo Cash App giveaway. If you send on Twitter or on Instagram, take a screenshot showing that you are subscribed on whatever platform you get your podcasts on, whether it's Apple or Spotify or whatever the hell it is, send a screenshot and then drop your Ravens Browns score prediction, including who the winner is, in a Twitter thread that I've created. You can find it pinned to my Twitter account as well as on the Baltimore Beatdown Instagram. And if you correctly pick the score and are subscribed to this podcast and show me proof, you could win $50. There will only be one winner, most likely, unless I hit big on a couple bets and I'm feeling a little generous this Sunday. But there will be at least one winner if you correctly predict that score and show us you're subscribed. So if you guys want to get in the chance to win some free money by taking 5 seconds of your time, go for it.
All right, last couple questions before we get out of here. It looks like we already answered most of Matt Magdan's, and last one is from Clay. Fun little game here. Who gets the first sack, interception, and forced fumble of the season? He says Queen, Peters, and Campbell. First sack, I'm going to go Campbell. First interception, I'm going to go Chuck Clark. First forced fumble, I'm going to go Derek Wolfe.
First sack, let's say Tyus Bowser, my boy. First forced fumble, I'm going to go with Chuck Clark. First interception, let's say, let's go Marlowe. I think Marlowe is ready to make plays on the ball. He's done everything but be like a ball hawk. So let's see him get an early interception. Actually, scratch that. Tavon Young. Tavon Young's going to rob somebody over the middle of the field.
I love it. All right. Anything else before we get out of here?
Now let's get out of here.
Week 1 is here, baby, and we're very excited. If you enjoyed the show, you can follow us on social. Twitter is at Podcast Beatdown. You can follow me at Jake Luke. You can follow Spencer at Ravens for Dummies. Instagram, you can follow us Baltimore_Beatdown. We're going to be probably getting back to posting mailbags at some point here, especially as we get back into the previews and reviews of the game. Really appreciate you guys listening in and commenting along with us here. A little bit longer of an episode as we are getting ready to gear up for week 1 and going to try to get back to that 2-episode a week format here. Going to have a review posted for you hopefully on Monday morning after the Ravens smack the shit out of the Browns in Baltimore on Sunday. So really appreciate everyone tuning in, and we will talk to you then.
Peace.